So I'm here with friend of the podcast, Flint Dibble, archaeologist extraordinaire. It's been a little while, and Matt is not here again, Flint, because it's past his bedtime. He's an old guy. He goes to bed, but we are young pups. We're vital and rearing to grow. So perhaps it's better this way. It's one-on-one. But before we get to the main reason I've asked you to come and talk to us, how have you been? How's things? You haven't appeared on Rogan since. Strangely, I noticed you haven't been invited back since then. Lots of other people have come on to talk about you.
Yeah, I mean, some of that harassment that we covered, and you guys just put out a video about that. That is still going on. Joe Rogan even mentioned me yet again on his podcast this last week
with Chris Williamson.
Yeah, exactly, with Chris Williamson. And so I've decided I've had enough. I'm working on a video to sort of show the hypocrisy here. And so I'm working on it. It's going to come out in mid-April for the 1-year anniversary for when I was on Joe Rogan. So I hope everybody will come check it out on my channel. And the reality is that what I've realized is when I met Joe Rogan, I realized he's actually a fairly smart guy, right? He was able to follow a complex conversation very clearly, able to ask complex, nuanced questions about it. And you know, this is something I've talked to the public a lot. That shows that he's a smart dude, right? And so he knows what he's doing. And one of the things that he recently had on this one guy who slanders me a lot, Dan Richards. And in that conversation, not only did they talk about me and slandering me, but Rogan brought up how the issue with Kamala Harris appearing on his podcast. And he brought up that there was this new book that came out and it presented a wrong picture of the conversations between Rogan's team and Kamala's team. And what he said is, he said, look, I'm right here. If you want to get the truth about this, you should come and ask me because I'm there. And it's like, but he does not have the fucking fortitude or the testicles to go and ask me, who we had a very friendly, congenial conversation. And so I sent an email request to him a couple months ago asking to go on and clear my name. And I've now seen his reply. And so that's what my video is going to be about, is the response from Joe Rogan to me. And I'm going to cover just exactly how this has gone down and what this has meant for me. And I hope that it shines a spotlight on Joe as a person, because I think he sometimes is not seen in what I would consider the right light by the media. Sometimes he's just seen as a kind of bumbling buffoon. And I don't see him that way. I think he acts in a very calculated manner in what he does.
Yeah, well, a point that I definitely agree with is that there's a lot of calculated presentation and disclaimers and, you know, strategic portrayals whenever it's necessary, when there's a certain amount of blowback or this kind of thing. So I don't think Joe's stupid in that regard. I do, however, think that he's like, what would be the way to say it? Like, I feel that whether or not he's like smart and able to follow things, he fairly often returns to fairly stupid heuristics. So you might not be a stupid person, but you are like behaving stupidly. So I kind of think that he genuinely really wants to believe in like Graham Hancock and other people like him, what they present. And that in the time that they talked to you together, he could see some of the flaws. But as soon as he could get back into the psychological comfort zone of having people, you know, tell him what he wanted to hear and that actually you were deceiving him and whatnot, he ran with that. And I will also say on the issue of hypocrisy, that particular interview he did with Chris Williamson, although you were like a topic in it of not for, you know, a huge section of it, but we actually have an episode we've already recorded specifically on the issue about hypocrisy. And you were the jumping off point in there, like from a discussion, I'm sure you'll cover this, but like that went from, you know, it's really terrible when you smear your enemies. The way Graham Hancock has been smeared by Flint Dibble as a white supremacist, blah, 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 that's beyond the pale. In the space of about 2 minutes, they were on to talking about how academics are all like absorbed by the woke mind virus and being funded by the CCP to undermine Western values. It was insane. And the other thing I will say that's on that video that we put out, there was video, I think it was the Daily Mail, or I can't remember the newspaper that covered it.
Yeah, Daily Express, yeah.
The Daily Express. So not like, you know, a famously left-leaning outlet, but they had a neo-Nazi, hard right, whatever, the brand of, you know, terrible people. And they were openly talking about how useful Graham Hancock's book is, how they find it good for onboarding people. And so much so that like Graham Hancock had to issue a response, right? Saying that, he denounces these. To his credit, he did do that. But that is exactly the thing that you were talking about. So it's
and to be honest, I knew about that video because Stephanie Holmhofer in Canada, she's a PhD candidate studying pseudo-archaeology. She had a book chapter that came out that reviewed that video, a peer-reviewed book chapter, and reviewed another open white supremacist who, again, used Hancock for recruitment materials. I have personally found a third one, a neo-Nazi newspaper, where an anonymous author has said that using Graham Hancock's ideas are useful for recruitment. And then you know that the former president of the American Nazi Party actually writes books on Atlantis and stuff like this. This is not like a uncommon, isolated thing. And so when we bring this up, I don't want to name any of these people because I don't want to give any attention to rando neo-Nazis for a wide variety of reasons, right? Yeah. And so there's no reason to do that. And what I find even more hypocritical is that the people that criticize me of painting Hancock as a white supremacist, Dan Richards, in that same episode I talked about earlier where he was talking with Joe Rogan, he brought up another neo-Nazi who has a decent-sized YouTube channel who also uses these kind of arguments and named him on Rogan. And then for the next few days, these guys attacked that neo-Nazi who was trying to defend himself on Twitter. So they know that there are these overt white supremacists. Some of them are Nazis, some of them are not, but they're white nationalists, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, etc., that use this version of false history in order to promote a racist agenda and to recruit people towards racism. And so they're critiquing me for bringing up something that they know. So that's just outright lying and slandering in order to defame me. And so that's really what they're doing. And it's very disappointing, for someone like Joe or Lex who invited me on his podcast and then ghosted me, or Danny Jones, who somehow randomly invented the claim when he had Dan Richards and Jimmy Corsetti on that I somehow accused Graham Hancock of being a Nazi. I've never done that. I have always said in print and in oral conversations that it is other more overt racists who are taking these ideas and twisting them into real overt racism, and that what this is a stepping path towards that. And you can see that if you go see Jimmy Corsetti's responses, you can see neo-Nazis in the comments trying to recruit from him, from his following.
On the last interview we did with you as well, you were exactly clear. Now, everything I've seen where you've talked about this specific issue, you've always made it like crystal clear what you're saying and what you're not saying, right? So it's the same thing, like if Rogan is going to apply that standard, then he asked you, are you saying, like you're trying to paint Graham as a neo-Nazi, and you said, no, I'm not. And I've never said that. And I'm not saying that now. You've said it on like when he's not there, like on our show, where, we're not very sympathetic to Graham Hancock. And neither of us is now saying he is a neo-Nazi. The argument originally and before is that like racists and white supremacists make use of that material. And then actually, I remember on the Rogan that you presented that as this should be a point that we both agree on, like that we can both, join hands and be screw those guys. That's not what we're saying. That's not what the point is. And yeah, it gets ended up like being an attack, because it just struck me that like Graham Hancock was kind of saying, this doesn't happen, Flint. This is really, you shouldn't be doing this. Then he needs to go and make a public apology, kind of denouncing it, right? But Rogan talks about it like, oh, Flint just smearing Graham, like talking about, these white supremacists and stuff. And they're, him and Chris Williamson were talking about it. But it's after that article was out, where Graham Hancock has made a statement publicly denouncing that use of his work. So yeah, it's frustrating.
I mean, it's just so well documented that these ideas actually come out of fucking Nazi Germany as well. Like, this idea of this sort of lost civilization, which shows swastikas and the Aryans are descended from them. That is still being published in books, like I said, written by the former president of the American Nazi Party, Frank Collins. And he's no longer a Nazi, apparently, but he still writes these ideas. And it's just like, this kind of stuff is fairly popular in an undercurrent of Atlantis things because of the research done by 1930s Nazis archaeologists that tried to promote this idea to claim land all over the world, because saying that the Aryans had the right to rule. And so it's just like, this stuff is so easily documented through history down to today. And yet what they want to do is they just want to turn it into some culture wars, I'm being canceled bullshit. And it's like, you know, that's their goal, so that they can then use it to try to smear me and take away credit for what I'm saying, because I'm just trying to paint everybody as racist. And it's like, no, I'm trying to call out the actual racist, but I'm trying to say, hey, you need to realize how your work is being received. If you are being misinterpreted by racists as writing Third Reich archaeology, as the people in the video you guys showed on your channel showed, well, then that should be a problem. If actual neo-Nazis think that your book is Third Reich archaeology, you should have an issue with that, you know, like, which he does, thankfully, but he should recognize that those are his enemies, not people like me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
They're the ones that turn that in that way.
Well, that's a cheerful start to the conversation. But
for anyone listening, make sure to look up my channel mid-April, April 15th, April 16th. I'm going to have what I hope will be the ultimate expose of this situation here that really shows, I hope that reveals Joe Rogan more for who he truly is. I think I have a take on him that's a little unique, because what's happened to me has been so obvious and disingenuous that it really opens up the floodgates for trying to look at some of his other statements in a different way, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and we actually have a video from back in the pandemic where he did a kind of public mea culpa apology video, which was lauded by people like Sam Harris and whatnot, and we kind of dissected it and showed it was like kind of masterclass in double speak and, you know, not actually, you know, non-apology apology. So maybe there are similar themes there for anybody interested. But the reason I have you here today, Flint, although it was covered in Joe Rogan, again with Chris Williamson, but he is not the primary outlet for this, at least yet, I don't think. Probably an important node. But there was a press release or a research paper, or maybe not a research paper, something claiming that the pyramids of Giza, underneath them, they have discovered some huge megastructures, and that this revolutionizes what we thought, like the pyramids are just the tip of the iceberg. There's huge structures all the way down. I've heard many guru types talking about it, and so wanted to come see you, you know, because this is going to be the discovery of the century. So we, you know, need to hear what an archaeologist is planning to do in response to this.
Yeah. So look, I mean, my goal is to get ahead of all this. So what I've already done is I've already submitted a permit to the Ministry of Antiquities in Egypt to do drilling. We're going to set up an actual oil rig, and we're going to actually have to go at an angle under the pyramids in order to discover what's there. And we're, you know, we are worried that it might damage the pyramids themselves, because when you do drill 2 kilometers down, it destroys the landscape. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth destroying the pyramids to understand what's underneath them, if you see what I mean.
Presumably this is funded by big archaeology. This.
Oh, of course, you know, and crowdfunding. Please, guys, go type in Flint Dibble, contribute money on Ko-fi and Patreon so that we can go buy an oil rig. We're good to go. Zahi Awas has already given me some thumbs up privately. No, the reality is that this is the biggest load of horse shit that I've seen in a while. And I've seen some horse shit. This is actually my second time in my life getting to watch a whole new archaeological conspiracy theory take off. And this one is like kind of wild in certain ways. It's kind of wild because 2 of the main researchers on the team are actual scientists, which is in its own right a little wild.
Actual archaeologists?
No, God, no. They're not actual archaeologists. No. They're not archaeologists in the least. But they are actual scientists with degrees in peer-reviewed publications. The leader of the team is a guy named Corrado Malanga, and he is a former professor in chemistry at the University of Pisa. He's published a whole wide range of articles on organic chemistry. But when it comes to archaeology, he has published books such as Alieni o Demoni, so aliens and demons in the past in Egypt. So Cheops, Cheops is another name for Khufu, the pharaoh buried in the Great Pyramid. And La Fabrizia dell'Immortalità, So Khufu and the making of immortality. Gli UFO nella menta. So he is a straight up ancient aliens dude. He believes in aliens and demons when it comes to archaeology. And he has several books on this topic.
He's not saying it's aliens, but it is aliens. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's aliens or demons is the title of that one book. So, it could be aliens or it could be demons. This is what we're talking about here. So, yes, he is a scientist who has published, I suppose, good research. I don't know. I'm not an organic chemist. So, I do organic chemistry for archaeology, but I do not do that kind of organic chemistry in any way. So I have no way to assess his actual scientific literature. But he is obviously completely unqualified when it comes to archaeology. The other lead researcher, he actually has an actual background that should make sense here. His name is Dr. Filippo Biondi. He used to teach at Strathclyde University in Scotland. He does no longer. He has a commercial company, and he actually I'm not sure about the right term here because of this new papers or press conferences, but he actually has a background in remote sensing. So using satellite imagery in order to investigate landscapes and things like that. But he also has his own set of fringe beliefs. He is of the New Age sphere where he believes that acoustics explain everything, and vibrations and things like that. So that actually is what works its way into this new presentation. And they actually did do a peer-reviewed paper in one of those pay-to-publish journals published by MDPI, which was reviewed, though it was hilarious. The second reviewer was like, I don't know if I agree with the data in the tables. Your models are interesting. Good job. That was like basically the 3-sentence review for the paper. It was an anonymous reviewer. And so it tells you how well reviewed it was. And the thing is that's where they sort of presented these methods, but they didn't present them and ever check them. And so what these people are saying is they have these new methods that they have invented, and they have discovered this absolutely preposterous thing that goes down 2 kilometers. Okay. What they're ignoring is all the evidence we actually have at Giza for what is underground. Already, there have been dozens of studies that look underground at Giza. There have been drilling to understand hydrology in the water table there. There has been done seismicity to be able to see about vibrations using known seismic methods, vibrations to be able to map out what's going on underground. There's been ground penetrating radar. There's been electron resistivity tomography. There's been muon scanning. There's been satellite imagery. In fact, I just did an interview with Dr. Sarah Parcak, who wrote the book on satellite remote sensing in archaeology, the textbook, and she focuses on ancient Egypt and Egyptology. She's a world-class archaeologist. That should come out later this weekend on my channel, where we both discuss these claims and present them in the technical detail that they deserve, and present her new research at Giza using satellite imagery and what it can show and how you can test it and check it. So, we have all this evidence for what's going on at Giza underground. And what's interesting is their data that they publish, they don't check it against any of the known evidence, right? So instead they just present this totally random thing that they've not tested their methods against known caves, voids, fissures, etc., at Giza or elsewhere to demonstrate that the technology works. And the real reason why this thing is a big load of bullshit is because, A, the entire Giza plateau is solid bedrock. So how do you build structures of rock into bedrock, and why? You're building rock into rock. Second of all, the water table is not that deep. It's like, at deep is 40 meters. And so it's like, you're saying that there's a city. They literally claim that there is a city 2,000 meters underground. That would have been a city that's flooded underwater at all times. It's not possible.
2 problems I see with your reasoning. One, you're assuming that aliens would, aliens might put rocks inside rocks. That might be something they do. And also they could be aquatic organisms where, that's the kind of environment they like. But so this is something that we come across a lot, and it matches exactly what you're talking about, that in the gurus that we cover and their kind of friends, they often look for a positive piece of evidence that they can slot into their narrative. And they very, very rarely consider disconfirming evidence.
Exactly.
Or the logical implications of like what it would mean. So that is often a telltale distinguisher between like good science, because sometimes people do bad science and also don't look for disconfirming evidence. But that would surely be what you want to do, like first establish these works, show that they're working in these cases, that they don't produce like false positives that are, make it unreliable, rather than, as is infamously the case, people can produce, colorful images or brain scans or whatever, and then dramatically overinterpret what those are showing, because that's like the history of science is littered with people making nice diagrams and plots and saying, the face on Mars, even. Right.
Exactly. And so, I mean, that's always my point. Look, real science works from the known to the unknown. We take the evidence that we know. Like I mentioned, there's been dozens of studies of what exists below the surface at Giza. They've confirmed each other. And there's like this new study going on in the Great Pyramid with muon scanning. Now they're using new types of stuff to ground truth it. That's what it's called when you test sort of a remote sensing in archaeology, is you work to ground truth it. And so, that's the issue here, is they're ignoring all the current evidence. And then one of my big replies is like, well, scientists should be open-minded. And it's like, scientists are open-minded to new hypotheses, but what scientists do is they discard the hypotheses that don't match all the evidence. If there's evidence against it, we discard it. That's how science works. That's what peer review is. That's just how we logically think. We come up with the range of explanations for the evidence we have, and then we look at which of those explanations match the evidence the best. And any of them that clearly do not match it, we find evidence against it, we then reject. That's how we move forward with science. And so we do have open minds, but we're not having open minds so far that we can't reject theories and hypotheses that don't match the evidence. And this is very clearly one of them, let alone that it's based on a bunch of unproven bunk where it all has to do with vibrations. The idea is this satellite, it's a synthetic aperture radar, it's called. It's used widely. It's been used since the 1980s in archaeology. It was invented in the 1950s. It's not a new technology. And the radar beams only penetrate up to 2 meters below the surface. So that's how deep you can use it to map out archaeological features below the surface. And what these guys claim, though, is, well, the rock underneath, it vibrates. And if we scan this multiple times, we're picking up on those vibes that are transmitted from below, and then we can map it below. And it's like, nobody does that. So you need to prove this method first. Why don't you go fucking map out a mine shaft that we know exists and has already been mapped out and exists 2 kilometers below the surface, and demonstrate your technology works before you start making some fucking bogus claims about what's under Giza and getting everybody to say, drill, baby, drill. Drill, baby, drill. I was on Piers Morgan. It'll come out tonight. And Piers is like, we should be drilling. And it's like, dude, you're drilling down 2 kilometers at a sensitive archaeological site. You're fucking going to be drilling. If you think there's something below there, you're going to be destroying it. You're an idiot if you think that.
That actually raises a point, Flint, because I know we were talking just before, and Piers Morgan likes to get on people who he expects to, disagree around issues. And I believe Jimmy Corsetti was on with you, right? But from what you mentioned, it sounded like he is also skeptical of this. So I'm wondering, do you know the reception of this amongst like Graham Hancock and co? Are they generally enthusiastic about this, or do even they have reservations?
The reality is, and I'm sure you cover a lot of gurus, there's a lot of divides within the guru sphere. They don't all agree with each other. And part of how they establish authority is they will critique other gurus who they think are even crazier and out there and more wacko than they are. And they'll use their pseudoscientific and sometimes matched with a little bit of scientific data to do that. And they say, no, we're following the evidence. We're well researched. So our ideas are plausible, while this group, they're not plausible. They're bunk. And that shows that that our stuff is more plausible. And Graham Hancock in the archaeology guru sphere is probably the best at this, partly due to his posh British accent and his demeanor, but also just due to how he operates. He very clearly is not an ancient aliens dude. He is like, you know, I mean, he used to be. In the 90s, he wrote a book called The Mars Mystery. But in the last 15 years or so, he's very much clearly distanced his ideas from these more laughable ideas like ancient aliens. And so part of the authority in the pseudos world, in the guru world of archaeology, that Hancock and his acolytes have is by trying to show how other branches of the pseudo-archaeology are more preposterous than their stuff. Therefore, they are very plausible. And so Jimmy Corsetti, Dan Richards, and they're part of the Hancock sphere. And so they're not a huge... Hancock's not mentioned this once, so I have no idea what he personally believes. Someone who he used to collaborate with, Robert Schoch, released a statement of skepticism. Jimmy Corsetti released some tweets bringing up some of the points I brought up in my live stream last week. I wonder if he saw it and stole from it. I have no idea. But the water table was the one that really convinced him. The fact that they're not detecting the water table with their technology, and the fact that, like, you know, that would have been underwater, to him was his reasoning for why he does not believe in this. And so it was funny to come face to face with him and actually agree on most of it. In fact, Piers Morgan by the end was saying, you know, I have more fringe beliefs, it seems like, than you two. Not me, but then Jimmy and Dan. And so I just think that this is just one of the way these different branches of the guru sphere, they claim authority by smacking down on other gurus sometimes, as well as smacking down on scientists and scholars.
That is absolutely the case. Although one thing that has sometimes surprised me is, like, there can be complete vitriolic dismissal of someone. It can get extremely heated. An example that isn't, you know, in the realm of pseudo-archaeology, but it's like Alex Jones went after Joe Rogan at one point, like very, very harshly. And basically he was angling towards, he wanted to be invited back on Joe's show, right? And Joe was distancing himself at the time because of the Sandy Hook, you know, statements and all that kind of thing. But the interesting thing is that you could have these strong denouncements, which people do use in the way that you're talking about, to like establish, well, those guys are crazy, but we, you know, we have better standards than that. But it's often the case that you can find that, like, later, especially if the prominence of those people grow, that they're willing to, like, bury the hatchet. And, like, you know, David Icke is now considered a relatively okay figure in like certain places, whereas he was once completely not. Or another example that I can think of is Brett Weinstein a couple of years ago was hiding and didn't publish the interview that he did with RFK Jr. Now, obviously, if he did that now, it would be, you know, promoted widely on his show. But it's just that thing that it's interesting that it can function both ways, that you have these strong denouncements, but then later it doesn't really matter. So, like, you know, you can be an ancient alien guy or a denouncer of ancient aliens or whatever, and it seems like consistency isn't a huge concern. Like,
no. I mean, look, I mean, one of the things that I've really started to realize, I mean, look, when I first went, I think we talked about this last May, my first time on here, and I was saying, look, you know, sometimes it's really tough to tell what people believe, right? And I don't like to accuse people of being grifters, let's say. And some of them I think are more outright grifters because you can see very overt lies. People like Jimmy Corsetti, who makes up lies about my cancer, for example. It's just quite clear he is fine lying. He does it all the time. You should know
about that.
Yeah. Or you shouldn't be speaking about something you don't know about, someone else's health, for example, right? You know, like, because you don't know it all and you're completely wrong and that's damaging. Or Dan Richards, who's done similar kinds of outright lies about me mishandling indigenous bones at a university I've never even been to, you know, and showing a picture of me holding cow bones to justify the argument. And it's just cherry picking random shit and making up bullshit. That's outright grifting. But there's other people where, of course, they're either really good at it or they do believe in the BS that they sell because they lie to themselves. And they're tougher to pin on outright lying. But one thing that really the really top ones are in particular really good at that because they are at the top of their game and they've either convinced themselves in the BS that they sell, or they are just so good at what they do, you're not going to be able to catch them on very many outright lies. And so they're usually the more prominent, famous, really popular ones among these spheres is how I see it. And so with them, what I'm starting to realize is catching them on lies might be tough, but what you can catch them on is the fact that they're just sellouts. You know, they sell out to whatever will get them money and fame in the moment in order to boost their fucking stuff. So sometimes that means critiquing a different guru. Other times it means holding hands with that same guru. And so, you know, what they're willing to do is just sell the fuck out. And that's what I think I can document with some of these top people in a few videos I'm working on. Like I said, the one on Joe Rogan. I have another one on Graham Hancock that's going to take a little longer, but it's looking at the prehistory of him going back to the 90s and the 80s. And so you can start to put together the picture. Maybe he's not lying. Tough to tell because he's really good at this, but he's clearly a fucking sellout in my mind. And so, you know, and I think I have the goods to demonstrate that. So yeah, that's how I see it. There's the different ways of handling being a guru, I guess. And the really skilled ones, they're really good.
I'm wondering, Flint, like with your experience of the pseudo-archaeology world, so a claim like this, because like when Joe Rogan was talking about it with Chris Williamson, for example, he mentioned, you know, there was a book published and it was saying about like the pyramids or, you know, power plants working for electromagnetic or whatever. And, you know, maybe Tesla coils are involved or something. And I was wondering, do these kind of things, like in your experience, become like, you know, flashpoints where this will be talked about now for a couple of weeks, maybe a month, and then it kind of just, you know, fades till the next time somebody makes a release? Or does this now slot into the kind of mythos and people will reference, oh, you know, they did find those superstructures in other, you know, like whatever ancient alien or like talking about a completely different scenario? Do they fade away or do they like get incorporated into the grand mythos?
I think, unfortunately, with these specific claims, the reason they went so viral so fast is because they started off being promoted by an InfoWars author, Greg Reese. And so it was the whole InfoWars conspiracy circle that actually boosted this and made it go viral.
That should be a warning sign.
Yeah. And Alex Jones then had on a different YouTuber who's a pseudo-archaeologist, Jay Anderson of Project Unity. And it was all InfoWars. But it went so viral because part of the reason why is some of these scholars, like I said, have PhDs and have published peer-reviewed papers. And so that lended it a veneer of legitimacy, even though this is completely unpublished. It has not been submitted for publication. And these Italians are playing the same old game of, well, we're already being canceled. They didn't even try to submit this for peer review. They're just already claiming they're being canceled because the claims are so preposterous. And so they're just playing that game. And so, but it was so confusing, particularly in the first week, that actual science communicators, big ones on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, made short videos about these claims as if they were legitimate. And so this one went really viral. It's been published in a number of different newspapers, not like your top newspapers like Guardian or BBC or New York Times or Washington Post, but like, you know, Daily Mail and different things, the Tribune, different sorts of papers like that are covering this as if it's legitimate. And so in that sense, I think this one's here to stay. I mean, the idea of pyramids being power plants, that's an old idea, which some of the Italian authors on this study, they're part of that branch of pseudo-archaeology, which I'd label lost advanced high technology, where they think there's this super advanced technology that existed in the past. It usually involves electricity and machines and lasers and shit like that. Sometimes that overlaps with ancient aliens ideas, but sometimes it doesn't. And so this group it incorporates those two branches of pseudo-archaeology, while the Hancock type branch, which likes to portray itself as more plausible, it doesn't believe it too much in aliens, nor too much in super, super advanced technology. It just believes in, like, you know, good ships and longitude and farming and shit like that before we have it. And so that's where you get this, it's going to keep continuing trickling for years in these branches of pseudo-archaeology, the ancient aliens branch and the lost advanced high technology branch. I would not be surprised if we see an episode of Ancient Aliens next year that covers this specific claims. And I would not be surprised if we see some of the big YouTubers that are in the lost advanced high technology community doing more videos on this that spreads it further over the next several years.
One can only hope. One can only hope for the great coverage on the Ancient Alien series. There's a kind of a tangential question. Maybe it's a bit more lightweight, but I'm just curious. I know you're not an Egyptologist or that kind of area specialist, but recently the biggest YouTuber, right, Mr. Beast, went to Egypt and produced a video and got to spend time in the pyramids and run around them and whatnot. Notably, did not really endorse or play much footsie with the, kind of ancient alien or, alternative hypotheses. He, in fact, addressed one of the claims made about like secret riches and whatnot, and that there was nothing there when they went and looked in the room that it's supposed to be. And I was just wondering, that video, did you see it? Do you think that was like a good thing?
Oh God, I reviewed it on my YouTube channel. I have a whole video on this. It's actually a really cool video. I recommend everybody check it out. It's titled Mr. Beast Slams Pseudo-Archaeology. And because he does, like, when I got that video and hey, look, I'm not an Egyptologist as my main specialty, but I have worked in Egypt. I spent several months doing mapping at the Old Kingdom burial grounds at Abydos. I've been to the pyramids. I've had to read and teach a lot about Egypt. So it's not something that I'm not familiar with, as an archaeologist. And so, no, I thought his video was phenomenal. I'll plug my channel one more time. Go check out that video because it's also a lot of fun and funny. My video. Go check out Mr. Beast as well because I do make fun of him because there's a lot of silliness that goes on in their video, which, that's what a lot of my colleagues were sneering at was, God, he's making light of this shit. But to be honest, he does a really good job of very clearly disproving some of these crazy theories. He really clearly demonstrates how we know why the ancient Egyptians in the Old Kingdom dynasty built the pyramids. He goes through a range of evidence for it, from the textual hieroglyphics inside the Great Pyramid to the skeletal remains from the worker cemeteries and how they show pathologies on their bodies from doing all the manual labor needed to move these kind of stones and things like that. As well as he went under the Sphinx to disprove the idea of the Hall of the Records, as you mentioned. And so he actually does, within a really short, funny video, an excellent job of debunking some of the more pervasive conspiracies about the pyramids. And so I was really impressed with him. And I have no way to connect with him, but if I did, I would say, hey, thank you, Mr. Beast. I think that video did some good service by showing a huge number of people, because it was seen by like over 100 million people, this kind of stuff firsthand. And so I think that's really important. So my video sort of goes into what he did and gives a bunch of extra evidence in a fun way that shows kind of like why we think this stuff as archaeologists and why we have all this clear evidence for it. And and so he did a good job. I was pretty pleased. And in fact, one of the scenes he went down under the Great Pyramid into the Osiris shaft. So it's a natural fissure that was expanded by the Egyptians, and you can go swimming in the water table there. They went there in wetsuits and went swimming in the water that's part of that water table under Giza, which shows that that's only, 10, 20, I don't know how deep the Osiris shaft is, maybe 20, 30 meters down. Clearly, there's not a city underneath this big water table. So even that video disproves this new theory, if you see what I mean.
I mean, I think it also proves the reach of big archaeology, that you can control the biggest YouTuber on the planet to promote the lies. There's that take on it, but we'll link to your channel, obviously, and the videos that we mentioned throughout, and your upcoming video probably out by the time I release this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So I encourage, as I always do, anybody that is interested in archaeology and also those who might be inclined towards pseudo-archaeology, though we don't have that many in our audience, I suspect, that, channels like yours and Milo Rossi's are very good resources and entertaining too. So yeah, if you aren't aware of Flint's channel, obviously check it out.
Thank you so much. I actually have a question for you, and I've been trying to suss this out a little better. So it's clear that this went really big in the guru sphere. It's something I'm really trying to understand better, is how pseudo-archaeology or pseudo-history as a whole fits into this larger, oftentimes more political and right-wing guru sphere that you guys spend a lot of time sort of covering. And I don't know, what's your take on this? Is this just a complete sideshow that just occasionally gets incorporated? How can I start talking more confidently about how this pseudo-archaeology sphere situates itself within the larger guru, conspiracy, alt-right, misinformation, disinformation sphere that exists in our world? What's your take on that now that you've had a little more time thinking into that?
I think there's two distinct threads, and there are overlaps between them. But you have the people who respond to this, like your Chris Williamson, for example, where I don't think it's anything to do with the white nationalist aspects or that kind of thing. It is much more in the vein of like bro science. If this was true, wouldn't that be crazy? Because like, I don't know if you saw that episode, but they also go on into talking about physics, and it's a very similar kind of response. It's just things that they've heard, or, you know, a theory that somebody has suggested that this, and it's very much like bros sitting around going, oh, that would be incredible. And in some respect then, like, that feels harmless in one way, but then it is immediately tied in with these, like, you know, kind of dorm room conversations to the bigger narrative that will, and academics won't admit this because they're closed-minded and they're all wanting to promote like this woke agenda, and, you know, the universities have been corrupted, and then they'll easily like veer into anecdotes about like academics they don't like, you might come up, or politicians. Like it very quickly moves over. So I think that for a lot of them, it is just another illustration that they can reference of like how close-minded the authorities and academia are, and they're like real scholars out there doing the work. The institutions are lying. Have you seen this new thing, right, about Egypt? We don't know anything, you know, like that's the use for them, or like a Tucker Carlson kind of person. But I think the other aspect then is that the alt-right, or, you know, that kind of white supremacist like Nick Fuentes or whatever, I don't know their reaction to this, but I think some segment of that use it more as like a black pilling kind of example. So it's the same way, but it's more like they're lying to you about this. So what else would they not tell the truth about it, about race, about like gender, about, you know, like, so it's like being strategically inserted into their views. And then, you know, I think you have also a wing where it's just like they're crackpots and they don't know how to assess evidence. So they see headlines and maybe they want clicks as well. But I think the main connection, even in both of those spheres, and there are overlaps, is that it supports the narrative that the authorities are lying, they're hiding things, and the real information that will blow your mind is out here in the alternative media space, in independent researchers and, you know, renegades who are doing the hard work. So that's what I think it gives them, because I don't think Chris Williamson is actually ever going to read any of the papers or like, you know, if I said Flint Dibble has a good breakdown of why this paper is like nonsense, right? Like, it's not even a paper, it's a press release. Do I think that Chris Williamson or many in his kind of sphere would want to watch a 1 hour breakdown of the evidence? Like, they'd regard that as, you know, no, that like, that's not the, you know, they just want to have the big idea. And at least in some part, the only other thing I'll say is that it did feel, particularly with Chris Williamson, but it does feel in general, that when people are going on Rogan, they sometimes bring these stories as like tributes. You know, like, I found this story about ancient civilizations, Joe. Did you hear about that? And then, you know, Joe Rogan is very happy to riff. So it feels like, I don't know, like people are Googling, you know, stuff that he's interested in so they can bring it up. So that's a couple of the things. It sounds, in some respect, that sounds quite pathetic, but I genuinely believe that is going on.
I wouldn't be surprised.
You know, I'm sure you've seen that meme of Rogan as like a great can, right? With people, you know, kind of peddling their wares before him. And I actually think that's a pretty accurate analogy. Whether the historical thing of that actually happening is true or not, just that image that Joe is, you know, the kind of king who gets to have science people come and debate things for him or that kind of thing. And then he'll pass judgment. Which one is right? Yeah. So that's a bunch of ideas, but maybe some of them are accurate.
I think so. I think in particular, the point that you brought up about how it starts off as just broing out dorm room type talk, but then it so quickly is maneuvered towards larger political conversations about how academia is woke and not to be trusted and things like that. The way they segue to me strikes me as extremely disingenuous, so that the bro thing is almost just a way of introducing this in a way that's palatable for the large scale audience to then quickly move on to those kind of other more broader ramifications. And I think it really clearly reveals that hypocrisy. And it's something, I'm scripting that video this weekend, so it's something I've been thinking on and researching on.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's been a pleasure, Flint, and
yeah.
I suspect that we will speak again before
I'm
too
sure
long,
you guys do a great job as usual confronting this stuff. I have a huge amount of respect for the way you approach this as sort of public scholars. If I did not have some health issues right now, I was planning on organizing a large Scholars of YouTube festival where we get all of us that are actual scholars that do this kind of public communication. We'll put it on the bench for now, but I think we should keep that idea going. I think we should really highlight how many of us do a good job of communicating real science, real scholarship, real intellectualism in a fun, interesting, palatable way for the broader public, because I think we should celebrate those of us that do a really good job, and you guys are really at the top of that. I mean, there's lots of other good ones too. I'm not trying to say there aren't, but you guys are definitely at the top of that. You guys do a great job.
That's very nice to hear. There are plenty of people that would disagree with that assessment, but that regardless, you know, let 1,000 flowers bloom. And I agree that like academics kind of countering the notion that we are all being paid by the CCP and like are purely programmed to promote the woke agenda, whatever that may be. It's important, like just to show that you're like, you know, you're just people trying to do work, talk about research and that kind of thing. So, well, in any case, Flint, thanks for all your efforts. Thanks for making the time. And yeah, looking forward to the next exciting news story that comes out soon enough.
Seriously. Thank you, Chris. It was great to see you. And yeah, I'll see you guys again soon. Yeah.